Hello and welcome along. This is the Self-Publishing Formula University, our regular live training events. And I kind of feel that it is like a proper university, although I should say it's not a proper university for legal reasons. But it feels like it is tonight because we've got a proper actual lecture. It's going to be a little bit technical. We are going to learn stuff. We're going to learn heaps of stuff tonight that can be incredibly useful to your author career. We are talking about the mystical thing called read-through, something you need to understand to make good advertising decisions so you keep campaigns going when they're making profits, even if they might not appear to be, and you stop campaigns when you are sure that they're not going to be making profits for you. So it's a subject, unfortunately, it is quite technical. There's probably no shortcut to learning the ins and outs of read-through. However, we have made it as easy as possible because a few months ago, when we started talking to the guys at Prestazon, and I'll let Dirk in a minute introduce the company a bit more fully, but they operate a platform that effectively helps you run your Amazon ads campaigns. It automates a lot of the process, makes it easy for you to create campaigns and monitor them, and it searches out keywords that are working for you. It does a lot of that automatically. It's a subscription service. But in the middle of this company is this man called Dirk, who we spotted straight away was a fellow spreadsheet nerd and has a bit of professional background in that as well, academic background, I should say. And so Mark set in the task some time ago to understand what read-through is for authors. He already knew from the early conversations we'd had together how important it is for authors. And we asked Dirk to really turn his analytical mind to this subject to see if he could create a tool that would be useful every day for us. A lot's gone on in the background. It's gone backwards and forwards a few times. I'm delighted to say that we do now have this tool. We have this, it's basically a spreadsheet, a Google sheet rather than an Excel spreadsheet. I'll ask Dirk to explain that again, why in a moment. And it's free for everybody. We're handing it out tonight. And in fact, one of the first things I'll do in just a moment is I'll show you how to download it and have it alongside you for this. So I think it's probably time for me to say welcome to this lecture in the university's hallowed halls. Hello to Dirk, who is joining us all the way, I believe, Dirk, from New York City. Is that right?
That's correct. Just north of New York City.
Just north of the city.
And I saw someone from Newcastle, Australia, and I slept on a park bench there one night in my younger days when I was backpacking around. Yeah.
I went to an air museum in Newcastle, Australia. There's very few places on the planet where I haven't been to an air museum, and that was one of them. Good. Well, Dirk, thank you so much indeed for joining us. You're from the company Prestazon, so we're going to talk about a few sort of helicopter things first. That's a very stupid way of saying overview. And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of this particular tool, which we're going to give out today. But why don't you start, Dirk, by just telling us a bit about Prestazon and the service that you offer?
Yeah, so Prestazon is an Amazon PPC analytics and automation tool. And so we work, in the past, we had worked mostly with consumer goods, so people selling things on Amazon. And a little less than a year ago, Amazon actually approached us and asked us what our thoughts on authors were. So we decided to kind of delve into that. And through that, we met James and Mark and started working and trying to cater the software to authors a little bit. But generally speaking, what we're trying to do is we're trying to automate your Amazon PPC to give you time back. Amazon PPC just takes a lot of time to get the entities right, to be managing your bid, to be promoting, keywords and search terms and ASINs, and it just takes a long time. And so we want to do kind of 90% of that work for you so that you don't have to spend a ton of time on it and you can go back to doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is writing.
Excellent. And I am a user of Prestazon, so I can tell you it's something that has saving time, I think, is probably the #1 thing that it delivers very quickly for authors. But beneath that is all the donkey work in spotting the keywords, particularly the keywords that come from search terms. These are the things that people have put in and have found your book, which of course you can go into the data in Amazon ads and get that information out of it. And it's dug out for you with campaigns automatically set up on those bases within Prestazon, and I've been very impressed. it's made a difference to us. Okay, let's talk a bit about this tool then. So before we go on, I'm just going to bring up another screen here, which I think if I click that, it's going to do it. There we go. So you can see there's a link there. First of all, there's a 30-day free trial for Prestazon. Now, 30 days is a very generous period of time. It's 4 weeks and a bit for you to run several campaigns and get to know Prestazon and work out whether it's going to be useful for you. If you're running Amazon ads, I would suggest that be something you might want to look at. And more importantly, for tonight on that page is this spreadsheet that we are going to be instructing on. So I'm going to try, this is probably dangerous of me to do this, but I'm going to try and move over to that page now and show you how we can. There we go. So this is that page, and you can see down the bottom here there is read through tool, which is marked on here. So if you go to the page, click on read through tool, it will take you to the actual tool itself. And what we suggest you do is come up here to File, click on Make a Copy, because that's a read-only version. It's going to create a copy. You can put it in various places, but I'm going to leave it on my drive, and click OK. And if I understand this correctly, Dirk, this is now an editable copy that I can use. You're going to obviously show us where we're going to enter the data so that we actually have it working for us. But yeah, I can see already that I can click on this and make changes. So that is now my copy of it. Dirk, before I hand over to you to show us how this works, can you just explain to me why this is a Google Sheet and not an Excel spreadsheet? There's a reason for that.
Yeah, so I'm an Excel guy. As you kind of alluded to earlier, I used to be in supply chain management. It's all about Excel and building out Excel sheets and things like that. Love Excel, but there are some cool things about Google Sheets that you can't do in Excel. And so I have a few complicated formulas in this Google Sheets that if you download it into Excel and open it up, those formulas break. So if you are a great Excel person, you might be able to find them and maybe find a workaround to fix them. But if you want to use it as is, it's just better to do it in Sheets because then everything's going to work correctly.
Okay. Derek, if you are ready, I think I'm about ready to make you an presenter.
Let's do it.
So I'm going to do that. It's going to ask me if that's definitely what I want to do. It's nervous about you being the presenter, but I'm not.
I'm nervous about me being the presenter.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, I've sent it over to you. You should be receiving control now, which is going to enable you to put that spreadsheet up on the screen. And I suppose the final thing, just before you get into it, we should just reiterate again, if you don't know what read-through is. Read-through, quite simply, is how much selling the first book in a series is actually worth to you. So let's say you've got 5 books in a series, and you know that for every book one that you sell, you will sell on average over time a percentage of books 2, 3, 4, and 5. That means that you may make 99 cents or 1.99 for book 1, but in reality to you as a business, it's actually worth maybe 5 or 6 or more bucks because of that read-through amount, because of that guaranteed, when you've got enough data, you know it's guaranteed, regular amount of income that comes from that percentage you go on and read the rest of your series. It's critical for us to understand what that figure is. And once we understand what that figure is, it enables us to run campaigns aimed at book 1 that might look like they're making a loss. So you may be spending $10 a day and only bringing in $3 or $4, but you know that if you've sold 4 books times 4 by that read-through value, that's the true market value to you of running that campaign, which is why you might want to run a campaign that Amazon ads is telling you is not profitable. So that's in a nutshell what read-through is and why it's so important for us to understand it and also know what those figures are for our particular series. So with that said, Dirk, I'm going to let you take over now and show us how the spreadsheet works. You'll perhaps start by discussing the data that you start off with.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see here, there's a lot of errors, right? There's a lot of NAs, and this is how you're going to get the sheet. And so the reason for that is because we don't have any data filled in here. And so we're going to start from scratch on this webinar so that you can see all the important data that you want to fill in. And the nice thing about this sheet is it's pretty flexible. So I'm going to try to highlight everything that's really important, and then you can kind of take that information and use that to your advantage. So I've got some raw data here that James was so kind to provide. And so I'm going to take this from scratch and feed it into this calculator. And then once we do that, we can kind of talk about some of the actual calculations in the sheet and why they're important. And so as you can see down at the bottom, I've got combined sales here, and then I've got some Kemp reads. So this combined sales information, it's probably coming from this ebook royalty and paperback royalty combined information. So this was provided by an author, right? It was provided by James. So hopefully y'all have something analogous that you can use. But I am going to be able to show you that, maybe the data doesn't look exactly like this, or you're pulling it from a different source. You're still going to be able to use the calculator. The most important thing to keep in mind is that it's all about the columns and making sure that the columns are consistent. So I'm going to start with sales here, and I'm going to bring in the sales data. As you can see, I'm starting with title. So I've got title, ASIN, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm going to hop over to the raw data, and I go, oh, great. I'm going to start with column C, and I'm going to take all this information. I'm going to copy it here, and then I'm just going to paste it into the spot here. Now, say the columns are slightly different. That's okay. It's really easy that I get to copy and paste. But maybe you want to copy, column by column. So long as these columns end up being what I have in the headers, then it should calculate correctly. So, making sure the ASIN is in the correct place, in this case, column B. I tried to highlight, anything that's green, I don't actually use. So it's there because I wanted to keep the place setting because this was the stock data I was given, but you don't necessarily need that if you're missing it. But making sure that all of this information is here that's highlighted in the black text. If those columns are consistent, then you should be good to go. So now we've entered our sales data. I also want to take this point to point out that if you look closely, you can see that there are duplicate ASINs. And what's nice about this is the sheet itself is going to do all the aggregation. So sometimes when you're looking at data, you have to worry like, oh, I need to make sure that every individual ASIN only has one line, right? And all the data is rolled up into one line. You don't have to worry about that. I'm actually, part of this sheet is going through and pulling out every instance of a particular ASIN and aggregating that data and grouping it together. So you don't have to worry about that. The other thing that lets you do is this particular data is, I believe, 30 days. Actually, I think, James, maybe you gave me 90 days. Judging by the date.
I gave you the biggest range I could, which was 90 days. Is there a recommended time span?
No, so that's actually the great strength of this is because I'm aggregating across multiple, it doesn't matter how many times a single ASIN shows up, you could actually pull as much as you wanted. So long as you keep in mind what the date range is and you make sure everything's consistent, you could put 30 days in here, you could put 90 days. If you're saving historical data, maybe you can only go back 90 days now, but if you have 90 days from 90 days ago, you could do 180 days. It doesn't matter. So long as the columns are consistent, you can put whatever date range you want in here. So long as obviously, you want to keep that in mind and you want to keep it consistent as you add other data. So right now we've got sales here, and this is the past 90 days. And now I'm going to do the same thing with reads. So I'm going to come over here to this Kemp reads, and the same thing. I'm going to go to the first sheet, and I'm going to say, okay, it starts with title. So I'm going to start with title here, and I'm going to pull all of this information. And again, same thing. If you looked into the details of this column, the same ASIN is going to show up multiple times. And there's multiple reasons for that. One is there's multiple dates. The other reason is there's multiple marketplaces, right? So if you want to aggregate across all of your different marketplaces, again, that's perfectly fine. It's going to just aggregate all of this information and spit it out into one neat, aggregated chunk. The only other thing, so something that I have pre-filled that's not here, you'll notice, is your reads rate. My understanding is that reads rate is almost always, 0.00 or 0.45%, right? So 0.0045. And so I have that pre-filled. But if you do have different read rate and you have that information, you can paste it into column F, just like I pasted everything else. The final tab that's important, and this is really important if you're using Prestazon, because not only is this sheet a read-through revenue calculator, it also has some nice perks if you're using Prestazon, or really if you're just kind of managing Amazon PPC, on an ASIN by ASIN basis in general. But so the last page I have here is spend. And so if I hop over to the raw data, I actually didn't get a spend calculation. So I've got some just generic spend numbers in here. And so we're just going to use these. Same idea though, that you can copy and paste. And I also just want to show, because I wasn't given spend information, but I just want to, do a quick plug for Prestazon, that if you're over here in Prestazon, if you're using Prestazon, right now I'm in the ASIN Explorer. And as you can see, I've got all of the data partitioned by ASIN, and this is partitioned by ASIN even if I've got multiple campaigns, right? So this is a staging data, so I might not have this showing, but if I had multiple campaigns, for instance, if you're using Prestazon and you're using the preferred 3 campaign structure, it's actually aggregated across those campaigns. And so I can just copy this data right here and paste it in. It's over here, and paste it in here, and then I can pull the spend data by ASIN. So that's just an easy, quick way to pull spend if you need it. But so now that I've done that, I've now put in all the data here, right? So we now have all the sales data, all the reads data, and all the spend data. And we are ready to hop over to look at what the detail page is looking like. James, how you doing? You following along? Any questions or concerns on the data entry portion?
I'm following along. Let me have a quick look at the questions bit. Yeah, so a couple of people asked where the data comes from. We should perhaps spell it out. It comes from your KDP dashboard. So if you go into your bookshelf, click reports at the top, something most people do most days, I think, to check on their data. And there are various ways you can get your data formatted for you, but this is basically the day-to-day data. You can only go back 90 days on it. So as a rule, as a habit, actually, at the end of every month, I harvest it for the previous month to make sure I've always got a copy. It's the most detailed look you get at your data. After that, it becomes a bit more summarized in various reports, but this is the day-to-day. I think it's called historical data. We'll double check that before the webinar is out, but it's the main download of your data. So that's where it comes from your KDP dashboard. Another quick question, Dirk, is someone's written what is reads rate, REEDS, but what they mean is what is, I think maybe they're asking what is read through, or did I miss something? Is there a reads rate?
Yeah, the reads rate is, and I call it reads rate just because I don't want to confuse it with royalty rate, which is over on the sales side. But I believe what they probably mean is your the royalty you get on page reads.
Yes, that's the KU per page amount. Yeah, 0.0045 is what I use as my averaged. It goes up and down a little bit month by month, but that's what that is. I think Ron's had his question answered. Yeah, so they're definitely following along. There were a couple of questions. Happy for you to carry on, Dirk.
Awesome, amazing. And so I'm going to hop over into these pages, and what we're going to see is still errors, which is expected, because now what we need to do is we need to put in our ASINs so that we know what data we're pulling. Now, the reason that I don't automatically pull the ASINs is because there's no there's no field, there's no setting in Amazon that lets Amazon know what a book is in a series, right? We don't know that it's book 1, book 2, book 3. James happens to have great titles that that lets me know, but there's no there's no guarantee that we're going to have that exactly. So one of the important things on this is if you're going to be doing read through, it's really important that when you're entering in the information that you're ordering it properly. And so over here on this little scratch tab, I've already ordered the ASINs in the proper order. So here I've got book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, book 6. And then when you look beyond that, there's a bunch of books that aren't actually, they're actually part of a second series, or they're not part of a series at all because they're a, they're a box set or something like that. And so the nice thing about this calculator is the first section, and I'll show you as I'm pasting this in, I can actually just take this and put it right in here. So the first part is for your series, but you can actually have non-series books in here. So right here, we've got this book number little field here. So I have now pasted all the ASINs in here. I've pasted all the titles just so that it's pretty and I can, keep track of everything. And now you see how it's all blank over here on column L through 0. I'm going to make some magic happen just by putting in the order. Did I do my numbers right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. And so as you can see here, as I entered in the book number in the series, it fills in all of this read through calculation. And so this is how you delineate, okay, this is part of a series and this is not part of a series. You always need to have your series in the first spots. So it doesn't matter how many there are. You can have 7, you can have 8, you can have 9, you can have 17, it doesn't matter. But the series needs to be in the top spots, and then you can still get interesting data about the other books. You just don't want that to be part of your series calculation, right? Because they're not part of a series. And the same thing goes, I'm gonna do the same thing, and I'm just gonna paste the same thing down here, and I'm gonna do the same thing, and as you can see, as I enter things, it starts doing that calculation for me. And so this is just nice because, just in this example, right, there are some books that are part of the series and some that are not. And so maybe I want to be able to look at both, which is not necessarily, you don't want to just focus on the series. You want to see what's going on with the whole account. And so this gives you the opportunity to do that. You may notice in this data, there is another series. The calculator only deals with one series at a time. So if you wanted to look at, for instance, the Ryan Kane series, you would just order the Ryan Kane books in the correct order as the top 6 ASINs or however long the book is, and then have everything else below that. So, like I said, the power here is really the flexibility that you can kind of move things around and make sure that you're getting all the calculations that you want. And so then all the data fills in here. And like I said, we'll go into the data shortly, but I do want to do one more copy and paste. And so I'm going to go to our dashboard, and this is the real, the real meat of everything that's going to show you all the important stuff. So same thing, I just paste everything in. I'm also going to paste up here. This is important because this is book 1. And so what we have here is all of your calculations for all your calculations that you will pretty much ever need, both for Prestazon and for your read through. So let's talk about what these calculations are to start. And so we've got some pretty base data here, right? We've got, so you've got your title, you've got your ASIN, we've now got your ad spend. Like I said, I put some kind of stock numbers in here, so you're probably not spending 3,000 and then 1,000 across the board, but it's still interesting to look at. You've got your average sale price, you've got the number of books sold, your sales, and so you've got then your ACOS. This ACOS is going to line up most likely with the ACOS that you're getting in your ads dashboard, right? So this is your ACOS as ads sees it, but that's not the whole story, right? The whole point of this is you're getting revenue from somewhere else, namely your reads calculation. And so that's super important when when authors are doing their thing, right? And so we want to just make sure that you're factoring in all of that information. And so what we've done is we've aggregated this data from net sales, from your sales and your net read revenue, and we've combined that so that we can see what your actual ACOS is. I'm also taking out royalty rate, so that's what this net sales number is. So we've got sales here. This is your total advertising sales. This is what, again, you would see in your dashboard. But net sales is, I believe, is it always 70%, James? I think we decided that we would always do 70%.
Yeah, it's generally 70%. If you price your book below something like $1.99 from memory, it cuts down to 30%. But most authors these days price book one at $1.99 for that very reason. Although I'm sure there are people on this webinar who use the 99 cents method and will get 30% on book one, so that would potentially affect it. But I think we've used 70% throughout, haven't we, to make this easy to understand.
Awesome. So it's always 70% as far as this calculation goes. In terms of, just to give you a larger sense of support on this, I've put a version number on this, so there's already version 2 in the link. And we will continue to maybe do tweaks as James and Mark and I argue about different calculations and things like that. Maybe we'll be able to add things, add functionality, tweak calculations, etc. And so right now we're just using this 70%. And so for the net sales, that actually takes out your royalties, and it also takes out delivery fees, per sale. And so you get this net sales number, which is less than your gross for advertising, and then we add in your net reads revenue so that you get this adjusted ACOS. So as you can see, this varies pretty wildly, right? You've got 178 is what you would see in your dashboard, but just for book one, your adjusted ACOS is actually 88%, significantly lower. You're actually, profitable on this when you take into account your net reads. And then we calculate this like actual break even. And this is really important when you're looking at, what you should be targeting, right? One of the first things that James told me when we were first working on books is he's like, yeah, if I have 200% ACOS, I'm probably profitable, right? Even though that is, way up there as far as Amazon ads traditionally would go. And so it's important to find what those numbers actually are in terms of where you're actually going to break even. And so we calculate those things, and you'll see them even clearer in the dashboard over to the left. The other important thing to understand, because this is calculating your read-through revenue eventually, is are these percentages. So these are your book over book or cumulative sales read through, and they're both up in the blue area, and they're also down in the pink area. The difference on these is a lot of the metrics are the same. The bottom pink area is really used to calculate read through revenue, and so some of the calculations here are really focused on driving down to per unit values that you can kind of look at and see what they mean. And so these per unit values are then, pushed in to calculate for read through value. But so as you can see here, this book over book sales read through, book over book reads read through is basically going through and saying, hey, did we sell more or did we sell less, than book one? And then book two, and then book three, and so on and so forth. And that's what this calculation is doing in order to calculate read through. This gets a little bit in the weeds, but one of the arguments that, not arguments, but I guess very fruitful discussions that Mark and James and I had was, what happens on a launch or what happens on a promotion, right? I'm sure all of you have maybe been trying to calculate this, this and you've seen all of a sudden that this percentage jumps to 300% or 400% because maybe book 6 is a new release, right? And so you're actually getting net new readers going into it, or you're doing a promotion or something like that. And so the way that we actually fixed that was we used a minimum calculation. So basically, once you get below a certain threshold, that becomes the maximum calculation that we'll use for read through. Because, because we're doing this in a time gated way, right? We're only looking at the past 90 days. If you just launched book 6, I don't want to factor in someone who read book 1 4 years ago, right? Because that's just a different calculation. We want to know, what's happening in the past 90 days. And so, it's important to kind of gate that through a minimum. If you're an Excel person, you can run through a lot of these calculations and kind of see exactly where all of this stuff comes from. But that's kind of the not so quick run through, right? As quick as I can do. And then in terms of the dashboard, once you filled everything in, this is going to give you the highlights. And so all of this really boils down to what James was talking about in the very beginning. What's happening with book 1, right? What are we getting out of book 1 in actuality? And so the first metric that we show is the traditional advertised ACOS for book 1. And so if you notice on the last page we were looking at, this lines up with what shows up in the column there for book 1, right? 178% ACOS. This is what you would also see in Prestazon. This is what you would also see in your Amazon dashboard. But what is this really? What is this really? What am I really making on this book? And the calculation there, we're taking all of the adjusted read through for the other books. So we're going through and saying, okay, well, the total value for book 1 is 524. The total value for book 2 is 686, but then we're actually calculating, we're using the read through percentage to sort of, lower that, to take a percentage of that, right? Because we only want to use what is passing through. And then we're aggregating that information. And what we end up with is the actual ACOS for book 1 is 17%. So if you look at that from a ROAS perspective, it's 5x. So your return on your ad spend is actually 5x, even though traditional ACOS is showing that you're losing money on this book. Which means, what would you have to spend in traditional ACOS in order to get to break even? You would have to spend almost 600% of your traditional ad revenue in order to hit break even. That's great. That's some great wiggle room.
Do you know what I love about this is that before you began this, before I think maybe we'd had this conversation, I did a really manual, laborious, like 3 or 4 days, lost myself in figures trying to work this out, because I wanted to know what my ACOS I should be setting as, what should I be aiming for? Where's my break even? I specifically set out my break even point. And do you know what? With all that data, just doing it manually, not in a way that could be reproduced or useful for anyone else, the figure was remarkably close to 566. It was something like 550, 545, something like that.
That's amazing.
That really is amazing. So I did it, basically by hand, manually, and was fairly happy with it. And Mark took a bit of persuading, that was the figure, but this is incredible, really, that you've come up with the same thing so quickly and instantly, just copy and pasting the data in.
And not to undercut our own work, but a lot of these calculations and going back to possibly tweaking things and updating things, these calculations aren't gospel, right? It kind of goes back to what works and what makes sense and what is going to give you a good look at your system. So, speaking to what Mark was saying, where he was a little bit skeptical, if there is another calculation that makes sense, maybe not replacing this calculation, but in addition to this calculation, that we find that we think is even more valuable or gives more context, that's the sort of thing that we'd love to add in the future.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions about process, but do you want to carry on where you are for the moment?
Well, the next step was just to kind of walk through this lower part, but we can definitely talk. Well, let me just finish this and then we'll go into the questions.
Sure.
the other thing that we wanted to do was, partially selfishly from a Prestazon standpoint, but also just to add additional value is, talking with James and talking with Mark and talking with all of our other authors, probably some that are on this webinar right now. Hello, if you're a member of the Prestazon author community, one of the tough things is, I'm talking a lot and almost disparaging the numbers that are in the Amazon portal, right? Or that are also in Prestazon. And that's a problem, right? That's a problem for us from a software perspective, because if we don't have the best numbers for you, as our customers, then we're not going to be very useful to you. And so we wanted to figure out a way that we could give you better information so that you could use Prestazon more effectively. And one of the biggest things that authors use our system for is for bid optimization. But what we do for bid optimization is we use an ACOS target. So we say, hey, set an ACOS target, and we'll try to manually, we'll try to automatically move towards that ACOS target. But if you don't know what your target should be, then ACOS target is kind of useless, right? Because you could set it to something, but if that's not helpful, then you may be shooting yourself in the foot. And so we also wanted to create a calculation where you could say, you know what, I want to try to get to 75% ACOS overall. So what should my Prestazon ACOS target be in the Prestazon system? And so that's exactly what this does. And so here, because, essentially, and this doesn't take into account this more complicated read-through rate calculation, right? This is just for this individual book, standalone. But here, 178 is almost exactly twice 88, right? Which is what your actual ACOS comes to when you take into account reads and fees and everything like that. And so if I want to get to 75% ACOS overall, I can actually set my Prestazon ACOS target to 152, for instance. And that continues to go down. So here, if I've got 76 in the Prestazon platform, my actual adjusted ACOS is 30%, which means if I want to get to 75% ACOS, I can actually set it to 189. Oops, I don't want to edit that. If I want to get to 100%, right, overall break even, I can actually set my ACOS target to 253. And so this is just a quick cheat sheet where once you've got this data in, you can say, okay, now I want to set my Prestazon ACOS targets. What are my goals? Maybe I want to get to 50% ACOS. Okay, I'm going to set the campaigns associated with this ASIN to 126. And so this is just, a nice little tool to make Prestazon more useful for our author partners. That's my spiel. We want to do questions?
Yeah, that's great. All right, I definitely have a few questions. Also want to do some clarifying, because I know not everybody is at the same stage of advertising, and so some of the expressions we're using can be a bit bewildering. So I want to demystify a couple of those. I might just take back control for a moment, which is this one there. Yeah, let me do this, make presenter. And I'm going to put in my Google Chrome window. So this should come up in a second. This is my Amazon ads. This is not Prestazon, this is my Amazon ads dashboard. And I just want to explain what ACOS is that we've been talking about. So ACOS is basically the cost of sales. There it is, there's the figure there. And it's displayed in this percentage format. So 100% would mean, in simple terms, that you'd spent $100 and you'd made sales worth $100. Now, slightly annoyingly, Amazon don't take off the royalty, so you have to do a bit of calculation, as Dirk's talked about that, because of course you don't get 100% of your sales value. But nonetheless, it's a good guide once you see that figure. So anything less than 100, 99%, would mean that you're just into profit. 50% means that you're making a decent profit, and 20% means you're making 5 times everything you spent. So if you spent £10, you'd be making $10, you'd be making $50 in return. Anything above 100 is a loss. So if your ACOS is 120%, that means you're spending 100, but actually you're only making $100 or so back, and you're losing $20. I'm not sure if I've got my maths quite right there, but anyway, the higher the ACOS goes, the bigger the loss you're making. So if I look at these 8 days, the beginning of October, I've chosen this because we took on a new author later in the month, and that confused the figures a little bit, as you saw in some of the data that Dirk was working with. But this was just one author and basically one book at #1 in the series. So I can see here that I spent $89.67 on advertising during this week, got 10 orders of the book, which added up to $39.90. So you can see straight away that we've lost money on the face of it. And that means that has resulted in this ACOS here of 224.74%. So in the old days, before we understood read-through, I would simply give up at this point and think, well, I can't make money using Amazon ads. Now, what Dirk has told me tonight, something that I'd worked out manually as well and can concur with those figures, is that in actual fact, a single sale of book 1, the read-through value is $27.27. Now, that means that for me to understand how much those 10 sales are actually worth, I simply times 10 by that read-through amount. 20, so I don't need to do this on a calculator because 10 times 27.26 is a very easy sum. It's $272.60.
I can't imagine why you guys convinced me to do this sheet. You could have done it.
I don't know. I definitely couldn't have created this spreadsheet. It's amazing. But yeah, so 10 times 27.26 is $272.60. That's how much those 10 sales will make me once those readers have got all the way through my series. It takes a few weeks, depending how quickly they read. Of course, they'll read at different paces, but we know over a long period of time, that's how much a sale's worth. So look now, I spent $89.67. Actually, my real world income is $272.60, and that is adjusted for royalty rate. So that's why it's so important. Now, to come back to the ACOS figure, what that means is this ACOS figure could actually climb. That's very, very profitable, right? $272 for $89 spent. This ACOS figure could actually climb and climb and climb, and I'd still be in profit. So that break-even point, the point at which this is not making me money, even after we've taken read-through into account, is the figure that I was quite interested in working out myself. And then we got to 550 or so 545, I think, in my calculation, and very close to that as Dirk worked out from the same data. And you can see, looking down the campaign, that this particular campaign, 432, which is huge ACOS, but actually that one sale means, you know, the contribution means that it has actually made me money overall, because you've got page reads as well to factor in. So this is all selling the one book, by the way, which is why I know that one book, these sales are all for that one book. So I hope that's clear to people who aren't used to this dashboard necessarily, of what ACOS is, why it's important, and how read-through works. So we perhaps clear that up for those of you who are not in the dashboard yet, but are thinking about running Amazon ads, which is a whole new webinar to do at some point, the Amazon ads one, but and how Prestazon works with that. We can revisit that at some point. Okay, I'm going to switch you back, Dia, because I think you've got this spreadsheet there. There we go. And I've got a couple of questions just about the way that the data went in the first place, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will take your questions as well. I can see those coming in at the moment. So one question, sort of straightforward one for me really, is that the series numbers, where you put in where you identify to the sheet the order of the series. There it is there. So one simple one is, do the books have to be in order, or could I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with them in various places in that column?
So the only one that's really important is book 1, having book 1 be first, front and center. The other ones you can theoretically mix and match, but the problem there is, so we mostly talked about this top line, right? Book 1 and what that means. There's other good information in here. So like your read through calculations and things like that. If you mess with the order, like actually now that I'm talking about this out loud, it will change the calculation. So remember at one point I called out the minimum calculation. So when I'm going through, the calculation is actually pulling everything above the previous, the percentage that I'm using in order to see if there's a lower value above that percentage. And so if you switch the order, that might switch how the minimum is calculated. So generally speaking, I would say yes, order matters, but it kind of is up to you. But I guess, gun to my head, yes, order matters.
Okay, right, that's useful to know. So what I could do, and also could do here, is I could wipe out those numbers against the Ancient Origins series and put them against the Ryan Kane series, but I would have to move them up into the correct position and have number 1 in the series in row 3.
Yeah, so we could actually, we could probably do that really quickly.
I don't know, by the way, if this data will be very meaningful because it's very early days with this series. We've just taken it on. We haven't actually relaunched it officially yet. So the data's, you do need a reasonable sack of data, I think, to get good answers, obviously.
Yeah, so let's just take, this one is book 1, and
Well, actually, that's the confusingly, that's the free giveaway. One of the things we're sorting out with this series is the naming convention. So On the Run is number 1.
Let's see, on the run right here.
Yeah.
So if we take that and put it up here, and then I'm going to delete this row, and then what's book 2? Is this really book 2 or is this fake book 2?
On the Rocks is book 2. That is correct. Yep.
On the Rocks. Okay, so we'll do that. And then I'm just going to just delete this row. And then, so if I took this, and it's the same ASINs, I just changed the order a little bit. And I could do this, and I could do this. And, I didn't do all of them because I don't want to go through the whole thing, but, now we're looking at, if Ryan Kane, if this were a 2-book series, for instance, I'm now looking at book 1 and 2 here. Excellent. And so, we're not calculating on the Ancient Origins stuff anymore. We're just calculating on that. And, whatever this coming in, I don't know, I probably screwed something up on the page. Oh, it's because I haven't updated this, right? So I have to come in and I have to say, okay, this is new data, right? And then this, and I put $1,000 in spend, so it's probably some crazy number, but, and then this is where you can see, okay, this is where it's all coming through.
Yeah, great. That was pretty simple. So if you've got multiple series, it doesn't take you too long to switch that around to look at them. Okay.
Yeah, and also, I made this little scratch sheet so that I would have it, just so that I wasn't clunking around removing duplicates and all this stuff. And so you might have the same, right? So if you've got this, you could have 4 of these with your different series ready to go, and you just copy and paste it in, with your different orders. So this is order 1, and you can have order 2, with your different series and ready to go.
Yeah. And the relationship between advertising spend and read through, because there is a pure read through value, right? Regardless how much money you're spending in advertising, there's an amount reader 1 is worth to you. Is that right? That works independent of advertising spend?
It does work independent of advertising spend, but I believe, and James, you might be able to speak to this better than me, because some of this stuff I don't get to see, right? I unfortunately don't have I don't have a KDP account that I can play around with, but these are attributed, correct? The reads that you're getting are attributed to your advertising?
Correct, yeah.
Right. So even though
not necessarily, sorry, that not in that data, no, that's total reads rather than attributed. But they've just, as you and I know, because we've had chats in the background with Amazon about this, they've only just introduced the attributed reads, and frankly, I'm not trusting them at the moment. So
right.
It's a sort of best guess scenario. They are the total reads that you get in that data.
So to answer that question, it's kind of the same answer that I would give in a traditional consumer products webinar about the relationship between organic sales and advertising sales. They are separate, but they affect each other. And so it's just, the important thing is to know what you have here. So understanding that, okay, these are my total reads. Total reads will be affected by my advertising spend. And James, I know that you and Mark are huge proponents of benchmarking. And if anyone does any benchmarking, they will absolutely see, the relationship between their reads and their advertising. But it's not necessarily a perfect straight line. It wouldn't be a perfect straight line even if it were attributed. But to speak to that, like you said, attributed page reads are being surfaced in the portal. They'll be surfaced in the API, and then we will show them from Prestazon. Hopefully, that means in the future, other things like royalties and things like that will also be surfaced. And if that is, then all this work is for nothing, and we'll build it into the platform. But right now, like you said, it's still in the early stages. Even what they have is a little dicey. And so I would definitely stick to this and just understand, what the relationship is, that these are total reads. They're not necessarily directly attributed to ad spend, but ad spend will affect them.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose what I'm thinking is that if you're not advertising at all, you get a trickle of readers through the year, word of mouth or whatever, and by the end of the year you've had 1,000 books sold. You could still look at how much somebody picking up book one, buying book one, is worth to you, because you could still calculate that read through value, right, of somebody starting the series, a percentage of which will then go through. So if you just had the units sold rather than anything to advertising spend, there is a pure read through figure, is there not? Have I got that wrong?
Actually, yeah, I didn't even think of it that way. But the calculation that I use down here to calculate read through is a reads per unit sold.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it is absolutely taking that into account in that way.
So what I'm getting at, I think, is that if you're spending advertising money elsewhere, on Facebook, for instance, the key other one, but there might be even other ways that you spent money, or you might have done a blog tour or something you want to factor into this, you still know how much a reader of book one is worth to you, which is really important in making decisions on platforms away from Amazon as well.
Yes, for sure. And then something else I was just kind of doing in the background is, again, I understand a lot of this data entry is can be a little overwhelming, but it can also give you a lot of options. So you were spinning this story of what would happen if you weren't spending on ads and you were having this trickle of reads. Well, back to that benchmarking comment or thought, you could actually use that as a baseline. If you had that data pre-advertising, and you could actually subtract those baseline numbers out of your total, and then these numbers that show up are then your actual numbers, right? Your what you can attribute to advertising. It's not perfect, but you can do something like that. And because all of this stuff is just copy paste, it doesn't matter what data you put in here. You can put your own calculation if you're doing something like that.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. And by the way, when we took over the Robert Story series, the Ancient Origins series, they were selling just under 2,000 page reads a day. That was the primary income. We started advertising on Amazon and Facebook, and I'm disappointed today if they don't do 50,000 page reads a day. And that is purely 100% the result of paid advertising. Nothing else magic has happened in that time. So just a little aside, paid advertising does work. Okay, now this has been it feels probably more advanced than it is. It looks more advanced than it is. It's actually, at its heart, a fairly simple idea. This is that one person buys your book, how much is that worth to you if they then go on, in a percentage, go on and read the others? And I know a few people have been saying, oh, this is a bit advanced and a bit overwhelmed by what they're seeing. And I think I did say at the beginning, unfortunately, there's no real shortcuts to this bit, which is why we put these webinars on the shelf to be watched again and again, and you can go through this in slow time, and of course go into the Facebook groups and ask the questions. There are no stupid questions in this field, believe me. Ask if it's things you simply don't understand, just ask about it, and you'll get good answers. But having said that, let me go into the questions box and take a couple of these questions. Some of them about what we've been directly talking about, some of them are related. One of them is here from Liz. She says, I haven't started advertising with Amazon ads yet. Do we go straight to this company, meaning Prestazon? Also, I don't have a series, rather 4 standalone books, 2 adults and 2 children's ones. Okay, so 2 questions. First of all, Liz, I'm sure Dirk will say the same. You absolutely don't have to go to Prestazon to run Amazon ads. You can run them by yourself first. In fact, I think that's a good way of doing it, to understand the platform and learn. And then Prestazon is something that can take over some of the day-to-day grind for you, probably once you've got your ads account into profit, and it's very good at that, but you don't need it to start off with. And in terms of standalone books, you did mention this actually, Dirk, earlier. You might have 7 standalone books, but there's still a read-through value, because people, once they get into your reading, tend to move through your books.
Yeah, and you can absolutely, all of this is just math, right? It's agnostic of whether or not something is actually a series. And so, if I want to see, well, how do my Ryan Kane books, feed into Revelations, right? You can do that, and you can just, add it as one of the options. So definitely viable there. And then, yeah, I just want to second, Prestazon is an automation tool and an analytics tool, but and it's very, very useful, but it is definitely sort of, for those people that have a little bit of a foot in the door on Amazon PPC and they're looking to save time on it rather than to get started from scratch.
Okay, Jared has asked, well, we had those questions earlier about where does the data come from? So let me show you exactly how I got that data and passed it on to Dirk for tonight's presentation and to make the calculator work. So I'm going to make myself present it again and show my Google Chrome window. So if I go into, let me just move that across a little bit so we can see everything. Oh, hello. If I go into my KDP dashboard, I'm actually going to bare my soul to the world here, my KDP dashboard for Fuse Books. So this is the dashboard, there's the bookshelf, there are the books below. We're going to go into reports at the top here. And it will think about it. Oh my goodness, that is unbelievable. I don't think I've ever seen that before. And I tested this whilst you were talking about 5 minutes ago. Kindle Direct Publishing is temporarily unavailable due to scheduled maintenance. Wow. Oh, it's back. That was quick. Very quick way to schedule maintenance. Okay, so here we go. Here is the day-to-day sales. I can go across a bit. Actually, look, I'm running a free promotion today. Can you tell? Big spike there, 168 books so far, so that's excellent. Right, let me move back in here. So how do we get the data? First of all, it's the basic day-to-day data, so you don't need to go into any of these tabs up here. You just set your date range here. So let's say we want to capture October. Set the date range, click apply. There's October, there's the page reads, there's the royalties, and we come down here and we simply click generate report. That is the data that I sent to Dirk. So it's the basic data, not formatted. You can only go back, let me just go back up here, pretty certain you can only go back 90 days. So if I click back on here, you can see, there we go. So currently back to the 26th of August, which I guess is roughly 90 days. So that's where that data comes from. And I hope that has made that easier. It's quite important to know that actually before you start using the calculator. Okay, what else we got here in terms of questions? Jared asks, is the read-through rate and ROI calculator something we can do automatically in Prestazon, or is this just a manual spreadsheet? Well, there is an idea for the future, if ever I saw one, Dirk.
Oh, I mean, that's the ultimate goal. So the problem that we have is we don't get a lot of this data, right? We don't get reads, we don't get the royalties. And so once that data is opened up through the API and Prestazon receives it, then we will absolutely build this calculation in. But we just don't even have that option, which is why we built the calculator.
Yep. Question from Dana: is the software best for those selling a fair amount, or will it work for those just starting out with sales? Example, if there isn't enough sales data for a series, will it still work? So I guess what Dana's asking is how much data do you need for this to be meaningful?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We want to make sure that we are valuable to our customers. Our cheapest tier is $50, and so just from a value proposition, if you're only spending a couple $100 in Amazon ads a month, and you're spending $50 on us, we could be 25% of your total money in the game, and that's going to be really hard for us to give you back, right? That being said, if you value, it also depends on how much you value your time, right? We were talking about at the front of this, if we can save you 4 hours a day, then $50 or $50 may be nothing. It may be a great value proposition. So there's that aspect. In terms of raw data, all of our bid optimization is on individual targets, and so we need at least 1,300 targets about every week on an individual target to make a bid optimization suggestion. So if you just go in and look at your targets, look at your keywords, and see how many impressions you're getting, on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis, and if you're only getting 500 or 1,000 impressions on a given target in a week, then you're probably not ready for Prestazon yet. We're just not going to be able to make a ton of decisions. And then on the keyword promotion side that James called out, those are done on a converted sale. So if you only have a couple sales every week, then we're only going to make a couple suggestions, which you could probably do manually. And so it's tough to give an exact answer on that, but hopefully some of those metrics give you at least a place to start. And then actually, if you go to our blog post, I actually have we wrote a blog post on this. And so there's actually a blog post called "Am I Ready for an Amazon Advertising Automation Tool?" And so if you want to check that out, it just, again, gives you some suggestions on how to decide if you're ready.
Thank you, Dirk. Sorcha asked about the royalty rate. So the spreadsheet is set for 70%. In version 2, were you saying something that you might be able to adjust that?
I can put you on the spot, James, because I actually had it variable, and James and Mark told me not to, and to hard code it into 70%. So that is something that I did. I don't know off the top of my head how easy it would be to revert, but I can definitely look at reverting it and using that, using a variable number in the future for sure.
Yeah, well, there's an interesting, the complexity of this is that some people might have book 1 at 30% and the other books at 70%. Some people might have the whole series at 99 cents, which means that it's all at 30%. And even more complicated, some people might have book 1 free. And that relationship is very different, because you could see from that spike, you probably just saw my sales dashboard. I put one of my books or book 1 Revelations to free today, and it's instead of selling 40 a day for $199, $299, it's given away 170 so far today, or whatever it was, 168 for free. A percentage of, I'm expecting, unfortunately, a much lower read-through percentage from the people who get it for free for various reasons. But can this tool work with that as well? Tell me how much a free book giveaway would be worth to me.
Off the top of my head, it'll probably be fine. I mean, we can actually maybe find out. Let's do it live. Let's see and see if anything breaks. It doesn't look like anything broke. Whenever you have a 0, sometimes you can run into the divide by zero error.
Yeah.
So I'm always worried about that. And I did not stress test a 0 sale ASIN, but just by deleting it and going through, it doesn't look, oh, that was average sale price. That wasn't 0 sales. Let's see. Yeah, I get a divide 0 on ACOS, which makes sense, right? Because there's no sales.
Yeah.
So I get that error, but it looks like a lot of the stuff holds up. So
Okay.
yeah, if and that's another thing. If we get a lot of feedback where that is an issue, I can definitely kind of build out to make it more robust.
Yeah, well, you're putting the calculator out into the wild now, so we will get people using it, and there are some mighty fine brains in the SPF community. I can tell you will delve into this, and they'll certainly try and break it if they can, Dirk, that's for sure.
Yeah, and and I'm happy, now that it's built. I probably won't put a new version out every week, but as we kind of collect feedback and people see common issues and things like that, definitely happy to put out more versions as we find the common issues, etc.
Okay, it's a few people asking about general advertising strategies, people saying they're just starting out with one book. And I know this particular webinar is for people probably who've got a dashboard and got sales coming through at the moment. However, on the shelf in the SPF University, there's, I don't know how many there are, John might be able to count them in a minute, but there's probably double figures now of episodes, and many of those do focus on some of the more foundational aspects of building your author platform and selling books. So a lot of the questions we're getting asked tonight that aren't specifically about the dashboard, you might want to search that library first and sit and enjoy those and soak up some of that. I had lots of people saying thank you as well. Let me see if there's anything relevant to the calculator. Actually, there's a question here from Cheryl. A nice easy one for you is the blog post you mentioned on Prestazon. Could you just give us that URL again? That's a really good blog, actually, the Prestazon blog. Well worth watching, keeping an eye on that as well for stuff that comes up. So
where's the best place to put it? Oh, did someone already put
into the chat? If you put it into the chat box down there, there you go.
Everyone's seeing it?
Yeah, everyone should be able to see that now. So that's for you, Cheryl. Okay, when you're entering ad spend, do you need to separate out the ad spend for each title? Tanya Williams has asked.
So everything is pulled based on ASIN. So here when I look at sales, everything, ASIN is what I'm using as the the key identifier, and that goes for sales, reads, and spend. And so I guess I don't know, James, maybe you can give me more information. Is it possible that a single ASIN would have multiple titles?
No, an ASIN is specific to a title.
Okay, then it should be fine. So long as every individual book is a different ASIN, then it will aggregate properly. I think hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think my head is spinning a bit, Dirk. I knew this would be quite a geeky, heavy session, which is how we like it as I say, I'm not too far from Cambridge, the home of mathematics in the UK. I hasten to add, I didn't go to university at Cambridge, but I do love a good spreadsheet. I think what we're going to do is probably wrap it up at this point. You'll need to download the calculator tool. Let me just get that screen back up for you. Let me bring that back to myself here. Make sure that you've downloaded it today and made your own copy, as we talked about and showed you how to do earlier. Should get the window coming up in just a moment. So publishingformula.com/Prestazon30. So not only will you get the calculators, a couple of other links there as well on that page, including the 30-day free trial of Prestazon. So if you are running Amazon ads, you want to give that a go, you can absolutely do that. I think there are going to be follow-up questions once people start using the calculator. So we'll deal with those in the group. And if you don't mind, Dirk, we may send a few your way over the next couple of weeks.
I'll do my best.
And I want to say a huge thank you, not just for the presentation tonight, which was excellent, but also for putting so much time into this calculator. It's version 1 and version 2 out now. I can see this is going to be a mainstay of the author world for probably years to come, and who knows what it will look like in a year or two's time with various iterations. But it's a fantastic foundation that you've done, and a really, really important and useful tool for us to understand the decision making that we go through, making that as accurate as possible, which is absolutely key, which is what Prestazon does generally, but this is very specifically very useful to authors. So thank you very much indeed, Dirk. I hope you enjoyed those late nights, just you and a Google spreadsheet.
You and Mark are slave drivers, I'll tell you what.
He's the slave driver, I'm the slave. We are both the slaves.
It's true.
Okay, Dirk, thank you very much indeed for joining us from New York. Lots of thank yous coming in on the chat box. People saying terrific information, very informative. Thank you both very much for this. Thank you. So that's Shirley and Paul and Tanya and Karen. Savalan saying brilliant calculator, entering data now. Thank you. Stay safe and have some nice time. I think is the end of that sentence. Nice pre-Christmas weeks. There you go. Brilliant. Thank you so much indeed. It's been great fun being with everyone tonight. Thank you again, Dirk. And we will be back without question with another entertaining SPFU lecture in the not too distant future. But if we don't see you before Christmas, have a great Christmas. And especially you, Dirk, you definitely deserve a glass of wine and a little relaxation.
Oh, I'm going there right now.
Superb. Thanks, Dirk. Good night.
Thanks, James.